Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice.
Hello, I'm James Wilson. Most Americans agree that drug use is a serious problem. Most workers agree that they don't want to be working alongside drug abusers. In a recent Gallup survey, 49% of the workers interviewed said illegal drug use occurs in their own workplace, and 32% acknowledge that illegal drug selling occurs in their workplaces. While employers and employees alike want a drug-free workplace, people disagree on how to attain it. For some companies, drug testing appears to be the answer, and in fact, many companies are now doing drug testing. They do it for pre-employment screening, for safety-sensitive jobs, for probable cause, or following an accident. Some test all employees randomly. Critics question the invasion of privacy and the right of employers to regulate off-the-job conduct, and even the accuracy of the tests.
BE&K is one of the nation's largest engineering and construction firms. Headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, the company employs more than 15,000 people at work sites throughout the United States and Canada. In 1986, the company made a decision to begin testing their employees for drugs.
We do large construction projects in fairly remote areas of the country, and we were attracting a lot of drug trafficking to these jobs. We have a high payroll, and the drug traffickers were gravitating towards the job.
Goodrich says they were told by law enforcement officials that drugs were being sold near their job sites. The company was also receiving anonymous letters from wives who were afraid for their husbands' safety because unnamed workers were going to work while high.
We implemented it primarily for safety. We're not zealots out to change the morals of society, but we felt like we needed to protect our workforce.
Morning. I'm here to take a drug test.
Okay. We need you to sign a consent form for us, and you're going to need to fill out.
Since the company began its program, over 55,000 employees have been tested at a cost of $25 per screening.
Come on, step right in.
Ready?
All right, this is a monitored collection. When you take this cup, step to the urinal right here, and give me half a cup.
On this job, we think safety first. And with the drug testing, it makes you feel a little more confident that you are in a safe environment working, and that the man that's working next to you is, you know, reliable. It's a good program.
If I smoke marijuana in the evening at my house, I know it's against the law. But what gives the people on the job the right to test me for that? You know, they want to come to my house and test me? They want to come look under my bed, see what I got? I don't think it's right.
I feel like we've got a better clientele, more qualified people. It seems like the workmanship's better, and I feel a lot safer on a drug testing job.
Who wants an iron worker out there hanging still if he's on drugs? Certainly the people underneath him don't want that happening. And by the same token, our clients don't want somebody out there doing less than the best they can.
John Neal, Director of Human Resources, is responsible for overseeing the Home Office's drug testing. Originally, only construction site workers were tested, but the program was soon expanded to include all employees. These days, everybody is tested, from the chairman of the board to the mail clerk.
Okay, Mr. Robertson, I need to know all the medications you've had in the last 30 days with over-the-counter or prescription.
None.
No Tylenol, no aspirin, no vitamins?
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all.
If anything else, we want to be able to tell everybody that we are a 100% drug-free company. And if we're going to test people in the field, we're going to test them everywhere.
For your drug screen, you get to choose between collecting your specimen while being witnessed or totally disrobe, put on a gown and robe, and collect it by yourself.
I think I'd rather put on a gown.
All right, that's perfectly fine. Here's your cup. Let me show you to the dressing room.
When you weigh the two against one another, the invasion of privacy versus personal safety for the employees, I think that it's more important for the employees to feel like they're safe here at work.
Employees are tested when they apply for a job, randomly during the course of their employment, and after all accidents. Any employee who refuses to be tested is terminated. Melvin Shelton agreed to be tested, but is still opposed to the policy.
I am a safety engineer. I know how dangerous drugs can be. But again, I know how dangerous it can be to do away with any of our constitutional rights. And it's far worse. Anytime you're doing these testing of this type, they're still not 100%. And until you make something 100%, and you're forcing somebody to undergo this, you're standing a chance of ruining somebody's life.
Management says they have safeguards to ensure against errors and to protect the confidentiality of employees.
If an employee tests positive on a random drug test, a current employee, those test results don't come back to BE&K immediately. They come back to the clinic that we use to conduct the drug testing. That employee is then contacted by the clinic before BE&K is even made aware of the test results. If the employee has some reason to feel that the test was false and should not be positive, they are given 48 hours to go back for a second test. Now, whatever the results are of the second test, then they come to BE&K. If those test results are positive, I'm the one that gets the test results, not the manager.
Employees who test positive are given up to 30 days paid leave of absence for participation in a rehabilitation program. They are then given another test, and if they test clean, they're welcomed back to work.
If the employee refuses to go through a rehabilitation program, then they would be terminated. Once they return to work, they're going to be subject to random tests for a period of a year. If they test positive again, then there would be termination.
Neil emphasizes that the company wants to help people with drug problems, not fire them. It has an employee assistance program that encourages employees to seek help before they get caught by a drug test. BE&K is pleased with the program. Positive drug tests are down by more than 50%, from approximately 15% before the testing to just 7% now. Accidents are also down dramatically.
Drug testing is becoming accepted and it's become very common, if not prevalent, in the industry. And if you're not testing, then you're definitely going to get rejects from other jobs, and we think that's going to give us a competitive edge over those people that are not drug testing.
With me to discuss these matters are Ted C. Kennedy, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of BE&K Construction, Brian S. Finkel, a research professor of toxicology at the University of Utah, and Cliff Palevsky, an employment attorney in San Francisco. Mr. Kennedy, when you began testing, what drugs did you find workers were using?
Primarily marijuana, with a lesser incidence of cocaine.
And how many workers would be using cocaine before, at the time you began the testing? How many workers are using cocaine today?
Well, the dramatic part of it is, as the film showed, we've reduced on our pre-employment from about 14 to 16% to where we're now running down in the 6, 7, 8, 9% ranges.
Is that reduction mostly in marijuana, or is that a comparable reduction across all drugs you test for?
Primarily in marijuana, but a reduction in all drugs.
Are there any drugs besides marijuana and cocaine that you discovered or that you test for?
Yes, there are about 5 drugs that we test for, but the rest of them have a minor incident rate.
What about alcohol? Alcohol can produce worker injuries and unsafe work practices. Is there any way you test for alcohol?
We don't test, although we do train our supervisors, and we put on training programs to detect alcohol usage on the sites, and of course we're monitoring for it on sites, but we don't have a testing program per se on it.
Do you search employees or lockers or equipment for drugs as well as test the employees?
No, we have not done that. We have, I guess we have the right to, but we have not done that, and we frankly avoid it.
What kinds of criticisms have you heard from workers or other employers or law firms or trade unions?
Well, there are some employees who are concerned about the invasion of privacy. They're concerned about the fact that something they do at home on their own time we are now testing for, and some people feel very strongly about that. We are not a union company, but by and large even the union companies, I think, are seeing that the unions are more and more coming around to allowing drug testing as long as it is done properly and not being used as a disciplinary tool. And we agree with that. We guard against that very religiously.
How can you prevent drug testing from being a disciplinary tool in some cases?
Well, one of the things we do on our random testing, no supervisor is allowed to start the random testing. We do that with a computer and a random number generator. Everyone's name is in the or number is in the computer, and including my own. And so none of the supervisors have the ability to be picking people for a random test.
Has your number come up from the random number generator yet?
I have been tested. My number hasn't come up on the random test, no.
Have any other senior executives been tested on the random test?
We've had 2 vice presidents whose number has come up, yes.
Now, when you do a random test, what percentage of the workers are tested at any given time?
We test about 10% of the workforce every 3 months, and then we put even the positives go back in, so it's a fresh sample each time.
So over the course of a year, how many workers roughly would you test?
Well, about 40% of the total workforce gets tested in a year on a random test.
I see. And do you believe that the statistics that were mentioned during the earlier part of this program about reductions in safety problems, that these are the results of the drug testing program?
Since we've started, our accident rate has declined by about 35%. I would not say that the 35% is directly attributable to the drug testing, because we've been doing some other things to create a safe work site. I would say it is one of the factors, certainly.
Professor Finkel, you heard about drug testing at this company. You're an expert in these matters. Are these tests, as they are commonly used, accurate and reliable?
Yes, they are.
And are the standards for the laboratories that do these tests, are they set by the government? Are these laboratories regulated by the government in any way?
Many laboratories are, but many laboratories are not, by which I mean that there is a set of federal guidelines that are promulgated, and in fact the program is run by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And it involves many forensic toxicologists who are not government employees, so it's a self-professional regulating program in which laboratories can be certified as competent to conduct these tests. That certification does not only include the actual analytical scientific techniques, but includes the whole laboratory operation, including chain of custody, legal and forensic concerns, as well as the science. There are about 50 laboratories in the United States certified as competent at the present time. That certification is renewable. The testing or the auditing of those laboratories, the inspection of those laboratories is ongoing. It is not a one-time incident.
Is there anything to prevent a company from picking a laboratory to do its test that is not on this list of certified laboratories?
No, a company could do just that, although my opinion, of course, is it would be very inadvisable to do so.
I see. Now, do we know whether drug testing deters drug use? We know that many companies test, and many companies that test report a decline in drug use. Is it the testing that is causing this decline in drug use?
We don't know. At least that is my opinion. We don't know. I believe that there is a great need for some carefully done studies to determine the effectiveness of these programs. We have already heard that there, at least in one company, is the belief that the testing has reduced accident rates and so on, at least as one factor. And I'm certainly not in a position to dispute that. But what I am saying is that apart from one other company that I know of, I don't know of any good studies that have been done in follow-up, perhaps 1 year or 2 years after testing has been instituted, to determine whether the objectives of the testing have been achieved.
Is there any test that is as relatively simple and inexpensive as the drug test we've heard about that could test people for alcohol abuse on the drug place?
Yes, there is.
What is that test?
There are well-established methods of testing a person's breath as breath testing, as we are commonly aware of it in the drinking and driving context, that could be used in the workplace to determine whether someone had a significant blood alcohol concentration.
Now, we saw in this film that the testing that was used in this company was essentially urine testing, and some people might find that's invasive for their privacy. In fact, there was some choice given there to a person who might have that concern. Is there any less invasive form of test that science now has discovered or might discover that could record accurately drug use?
The simple answer to that question is no. There is considerable research being conducted at the present time, which I think is going to go on for some time to come, with the possible use of head hair testing. There's also the possibility of using saliva, although I might add that saliva is not, if I may use the vernacular, a common spit. It is a sample that has to be taken from a gland in the mouth to reflect what is in the body. So it is also invasive, but might be less troublesome to the employee if it was a saliva test. But in both those cases, there is more work to be done before they could be adopted as specimens for tests.
Thank you. Let me turn to Cliff Pilevsky, an attorney from San Francisco. Mr. Pilevsky, you have some real concerns about drug testing on the workplace. What are your concerns?
Well, my concern begins with what is the proper role of the employer. Is drug testing as it's being conducted now really a disguised law enforcement effort? Are we really privatizing criminal law? And I think that's really what's happening. I recognize the honorable intentions of testing for safety, and I believe that is what the company really believes. But if you're not testing for alcohol, which is statistically the most abused drug and clearly the one that is most impairing, you're not testing for safety. I believe you can test for safety. There are any number of impairment tests which test for specific skills, reflexes, hand-eye coordination, which you can administer before the accident happens, which are not disrespectful towards the employee, which are not dehumanizing, and which are not searches and seizures.
Let me clarify this for our audience for a moment. You're suggesting, if I understand you, that there should be first a test to find out if the worker is impaired from doing his or her job adequately and safely. And then only if there is evidence of impairment should there be a further test for drug testing. Is that for drug use? Is that correct?
Well, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you're concerned about safety, you should test for impairment.
Test for impairment.
I think that the only question that is a legitimate question for an employer is, are you impaired? I don't think it's their business whether you're impaired because you stayed up all night with a sick baby, or whether you stayed up all night fighting with your spouse, or whether you stayed up because of drugs. I think it's a very dangerous precedent to have employers start regulating off-the-job conduct. There's no place to draw that line except, does it affect performance? If your performance is not affected, it's none of their business. That's what it means to live and work in a free country.
And would you have a routine or random form of impairment testing? Would you recommend that for companies?
No. I would recommend impairment testing only be used in safety-sensitive jobs where there's a demonstrated problem. I think any kind of testing is disrespectful to an employee, especially someone who has been working for years and performing safely. Gets up, is a hard-working individual, goes to work. To be told, let me give you an example of the testing that we saw in the film. Monitor testing. Most courts that have dealt with that subject have disapproved of monitor testing. The notion of saying, because I'm your employer, I can force you to expose your genitals to me because I don't even trust you to give me a clean sample is an incredible concept. I mean, 3 years ago, that would be considered a perverse notion to force someone to expose their genitals to you.
Let me ask you about how the courts have handled this. First of all, what applicable court rulings or laws govern what private employers may now do with respect to testing?
Well, the U.S. Constitution does not regulate private employers. That will be determined state by state. And you have to look to what is in the state constitution and what the various state laws include. California has an express right to privacy in the Constitution, so the testing that's being done at Mr. Kennedy's firm could not be done here.
I see. And if you are concerned about testing for impairment, or that performance is the principal and indeed the only legitimate concern the employer has in this relationship, do you feel that acceptance by the employees of the testing, a lack of objection, would override this? Do you believe that the employee's own view on this matter should be taken into account, or is there something more fundamental here in your view than simply whether the employees like it or not like it?
Well, I certainly think that anyone who wants to be tested can volunteer to be tested. So consent, actual and honest consent, would alleviate my concerns. But as you saw here, someone's called in and say, sign this consent form, and if you don't, you're fired. That's not consent.
Okay. Mr. Kennedy, what is your reaction to the view that what you should be concerned about is the ability of the worker to do the job and whether that ability has been impaired, and that and only that is what you should test for? What's your response?
Well, it would be nice to say that, as we start off on your comment, that it would be nice to say someone who's been with me 15 years that I exhibit mistrust when I ask that individual to go in and be tested. On the other hand, I have a bigger problem with saying I'm going to eliminate all people who have been here for 15 years, or I'm going to eliminate all officers of the company, or Ted Kennedy doesn't have to take the test. I know of no way to get around that other than to say we all take the test starting with me. So I think
get away from it by not doing random testing. By requiring cause, as opposed to saying 10% of you, whether you've been here 30 years or 2 weeks.
But when you look at the job sites we have up there, and when you see construction is a very dangerous business. We have some of the highest accident rates of any industry.
That's why you need to find out who's impaired. But drug testing doesn't tell you that. Why don't you use a test that will tell you who's impaired?
Well, I think drug testing does tell. Our statistics of the testing around accidents show that there's a higher percentage of drug usage there than there are in our random tests. So I believe there is a correlation. We also believe there is a correlation between our reduced accident rates and the fact that we have started drug testing. I think that, as the film showed, we are seeing people that probably, I don't know that we are correcting the problem of drug usage, but I do think that the people who know they're going to be tested are probably going somewhere else.
Or using a different drug.
Perhaps.
They're drinking. That's what happened when the Army instituted mass urine testing. The rates of positives went way down, and the rates of alcoholism and drinking went way up. I think no one is dealing with why people use drugs.
Let me ask Mr. Kennedy on this alcohol question. If, as Professor Finkel says, a breathalyzer is a reasonably reliable way of testing for alcohol abuse, have you given any thought to using such a technique to test for alcohol abuse?
Yes, and the fact that we are not testing for alcohol and are testing for drugs doesn't make the testing of drugs improper, in my view. Maybe we need to go to the next step, and we are considering that. But we started with we think that we can identify alcohol a lot easier, and that we can train our supervisors a lot easier than we can for the use of drugs. And so we have started with the drugs, and we are considering the use of other types of testing for alcohol. We haven't got there yet.
Professor Finkel, are there companies that routinely test for alcohol abuse among their employees?
Yes, there are.
And what has been their experience?
I really don't know. I suspect, and I stress that I simply suspect, that the same effects occur, that in the beginning there are many people who test positive, and then over time that positive rate will drop away.
I see. Now, if you wanted to test for impairment, as Mr. Pilevsky says, on your construction sites, which are scattered all over the world, I suppose, could you have supervisors use tests or make evaluations that would identify in advance of an accident an impaired employee in your business?
If there are such tests, one of the reluctance we have is turning over the test results to any supervisor for the reasons we brought up before. I want that coordinated in the privacy, and I don't want to be a possibility of someone using it for disciplinary or discriminatory reasons. I would worry about at the sites all over the world, as you mentioned, that an impairment test, we have too many people making judgment calls on that. And so I don't know of impairment tests for our industry that are available.
Do you know of tests that could be used in a way that would be both reliable and would reduce the risk that a supervisor who would administer the test would do so in a discriminatory way?
Well, sure. There was a test called critical tracking that was developed by the government for NASA 25 years ago. The military's used it, the National Highway Traffic Safety Board used it, the FAA uses it.
What is
It's essentially a 20-second video game that tests your hand-eye coordination and your reflex time, and it tests you against your own established levels. So it'll say you are impaired compared to what you have been able to do in the past. It doesn't tell you why. You have to get away from the notion of discipline, because it doesn't mean that the person cannot perform today, and it doesn't mean that they will have an accident. It means that you're not up to speed for some reason. We're going to take every precaution and not let you perform that task today, or we'll let you come back in 15 minutes or a half hour and try again.
Well, let me ask you about that test. Suppose the test is, as you described, reliable and simple to use, but isn't there a problem by having a supervisor use this test, that the supervisor could report the results or administer the test in such a way that would be adverse to the employee's interest in a way that the blind or random drug screening might not be?
It's not administered. An employee comes down, sits down, puts in their number, and it's like playing video game Pong by yourself. It's not administered. It's not subjectively determined. It's all done by a computer.
Mr. Kennedy, what is the employee assistance program? Suppose you find a drug user. What do you try to do for them before they are asked to leave?
Well, they are encouraged and told that as a condition of employment they must enter into a detoxification program and an employee assistance program, and that we will keep them on the payroll, but and that's about a 30-day period, and then beyond that, if they're needed to go for another 35 days, including a rehabilitation center, it is paid for, and we are encouraging them. Now, if they will not enter the program and will not make use of the program, then frankly, we terminate them.
Professor Finkel, these employee assistance programs involving 30 or 60 days of detoxification, is there any evidence that they're adequate to deal with the problem of substance abuse among employees?
Oh, I think there's a lot of evidence that these programs are absolutely a key part of any program that involves the detection and then the help to an employee that may be found positive for using drugs. Simply to detect drug users in the workplace or anywhere else and then simply chalk that up as a statistic and do nothing more about it is patently silly. So these employment assistance programs that are designed to help the employee on the job and with their health problems and so on are absolutely key.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for Crime File. I'm James Wilson.
Crime File is a production of CF Productions Incorporated, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for this program was provided by the National Institute of Justice, research arm of the U.S. Department of Justice.